I can still adjust the sensitivity a little bit here. There's good. All right. Okay, so what I did was yesterday, just last night. This is something I put together last night. I wrote an app. It's not 100% done. By the time I was, by the time I, just kind of let it go, it was 1 a.m. already, and I have to wake up at 6:30 to 6:15 to drive my kid to school. So I decided, well, maybe I should just kind of let it go because it can still go on for at least 2 more hours. Okay, just because of the features that I want to add to it. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is to kind of show you guys what it is about, and then we'll go to the app itself. Okay. So the first thing is to talk about what this app is for. It's for DBT diary card. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take a look at the DBT diary card. DBT stands for. Okay, let's look at DBT first. So this is all really kind of interesting stuff. DBT stands for dialectical behavior therapy. Okay, so at one point it was only for people with severe disorder of some kind, personality disorder. But later on, people found that it's actually a useful therapy for normal people who are just stressed out and have other things to deal with, and it just helps people to better prepare for situations and stress, and also with how to communicate effectively with other people. So I think all in all, DBT is really a good thing to promote.
What therapy is it? Shock therapy?
No.
Because
This
I
is
saw electrical. I'm thinking.
dialectical.
Oh, electrical.
Yeah, dialectical. Well, in fact, we'll just go here, just so that you guys are not too worried about your mobile device shocking you. Okay, so it's a psychotherapy that was developed by Lionhead, and it combines standard CBT, which is cognitive behavioral techniques for emotion regulation and reality testing, with concepts of distress tolerance, acceptance, mindful awareness, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's really an interesting thing. I think the word therapy really throws off a lot of people. People think, if I'm not crazy, this is not for me. But that really is not the case. Okay, DBT is really, it's just like running on a treadmill. Okay, it keeps your psychological strength up, and so you'll be ready for stressful situation without getting too stressful, and be able to handle other things that life can throw at you. Okay, shit happens basically, and this gives you the tool to handle it when it does happen. Okay, and also how helps you with interpersonal relationship and stuff like that. So it's really you guys can look into it when you have time. I really strongly suggest people to look into this. When and where I grew up, this sort of stuff was never taught. Okay, I think it's one of the most basic skills that kids, especially teenagers, should be exposed to. Now I think I've heard people saying, even karate dojos, would teach, mindfulness and other things related to this kind of thing. And I think it's a good thing. I mean, it's really helpful to help people to develop mindfulness. Okay, but getting back to this, getting back to the app itself. This one's kind of. I just want to show you a form for diary card. Okay, let me see. It's about the same. Okay, that this one would suffice. Okay, we'll just take a look here. Okay, so what a diary card is, this is one part of a diary card. I know some of you are feeling like, well, I don't really need this. Okay, yes, a few columns, maybe a little bit, extreme, but this what a diary card is. It helps people keep track of their feelings and also their urges, and also, when people start to learn skills, they can start to kind of write a log of, I just applied a certain skill to handle a particular situation. It improves the awareness of people of their feelings, emotions, their urges, because emotions will start to trigger people to want to do something, not necessarily that they will do something, but they will trigger the urges to do something. And also, when people start to learn the techniques, they would kind of catch themselves before they do something out of their urges and say, you know what, I just applied a certain technique and it's a good thing.
It'd be great for PTSD.
I think it's good for just about anything. Yeah, but PTSD is one application. I think DBT is one therapy that can help just in general. I mean, everybody can use it. The other one is called ACT, ACT, which stands for Acceptance Commitment Therapy. And once again, it is really good for everybody. Okay, including people who think, hey, I'm good. I mean, I'm level-headed and balanced. It doesn't hurt to learn some of the techniques. It really is a good good information. So basically, they divide it into these categories, and then they chop it down to a week. Okay, so this is called a weekly report. So I was writing an app to see, this is the urge to blah blah blah, urge to quit therapy, urge to harm, and then here they have the skills. Okay, the skills that people will learn in DBT. So they will basically apply these techniques here, using the wise mind, which is a combination of the emotion mind and also the reasonable mind, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I'm not here to teach DBT or ACT, but I'm here to teach how to turn a form like this into an app. Okay. Now I can easily turn this into an app just by putting in buttons and list pickers and stuff like that. But if I cannot save the data, it's not going to be helpful at all. Okay. And then the second part is, well, yeah, we can program this thing to save the data remotely, but a lot of people have they feel uneasy when they're uploading this kind of information onto the internet. So what I'm going to do is to save the data locally on the device itself. Now, if you think that if you save the data locally, it's not secure, you can actually make it slightly more secure, because in most Androids, if you look under storage, there's an option to encrypt the data partition. Okay. Now, if you encrypt the data partition, that means every time you power up your machine, you will have to type in your passcode just to start it up. But once you start it up, then it'll be decrypted. It won't ask you for a password every single time again. If you lose your password, you lose your entire data partition, because it cannot be recovered. But that's one way to kind of make sure your device is slightly more secure than not having that feature. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about encrypting your data partition?
But you cache it like unlocked already, then it doesn't really do much then.
That is correct, but that's why you also want to set up a screen password. Some people use gesture. It depends on the version of Android that you have, but you can set up a passcode, a PIN, just to get into the Android system. Yep.
Would it work on the slide lock, or does it need to be a actual numerical password?
You mean the encryption?
Yeah.
I think the encryption is it's alphanumeric. It's a normal password. So you basically, but you have to do it every single time you power up your device. So every time you reset it, it will ask you for the password again.
Okay.
And it gives you some basic encryption protection. A lot of people are saying the RSA can crack basically any encrypted transmission or storage, because they are the one who came up with the algorithms. So they probably have quick ways to crack encryption as well. So that's just what some people say.
The first fallacy is thinking that anything is secure. Nothing is secure.
Well, nothing is secure because they just have to convince you to give them the password, right? And if they cannot, then they would there are other things they can do. Okay, so that's one way. Sorry, go ahead.
Can you quickly show us the interface where the encryption is offered?
The interface?
Yeah. What do you see with this? They ask, do you want to encrypt?
Okay, let me see. Okay, let me get to it first, and then I'll show you, see if I can find screenshots of that. It will be listed under storage. Internal storage. Oh, I guess not.
I think it's security,
Under security, okay.
depending on your version.
Yeah, they keep moving things around a little bit. So certain things, they under security, that's encrypt phone requires a numeric PIN or password to decrypt your phone each time you power it on. So that's an option under security, under settings.
Yeah, and it does say you have to have a PIN or a password.
Yep.
Other encryption or other types, lock type methods are not.
Yep. And here's the warning for those of you who want to do it like right now. Here's the warning. You can encrypt your account settings, downloaded apps, and their data, media, and other files. Once you encrypt your phone, you need to type a numeric PIN or password to decrypt it each time you power it on. You can't decrypt your phone except by performing a factory data reset, erasing all your data. Okay, so if you lose your password, because, hey, I can think of this really cool password right now, and then you forget to write it down, then you can potentially lose everything that you have already saved. Encryption takes an hour or so. You must start with a charged battery and keep your phone plugged in until encryption is complete. If you interrupt the encryption process, you will lose some or all of your data. Okay, so that is a warning. Okay, so, and I can't even do it now because I have not plugged in my phone. Okay, so it makes sure that you have to plug in your phone first before you perform the encryption.
A question?
Yep.
What does that thing about encryption takes an hour?
Because it's a slow process, encryption, encrypting several gigabytes, using a processor on these things, does take a little bit of time.
Suppose you just want to encrypt a single paragraph. Does that take an hour?
No, it cannot encrypt just a single paragraph. That's the thing. I mean, you have to encrypt the entire drive. Yeah, it encrypts the entire data partition, which means, if you have, let's say you have 4 gigabytes of music and video files and whatnot, already stored on your phone, it's going to encrypt everything. It does increase the overhead when you need to access your media and other files, so it will incur an overhead to do so. On the other hand, anyone who picks up your phone, if you lock your screen, they will have to reset the machine. But after they reset the machine, they will have to enter the password to get to the content. Yep.
Is it a real overhead since it has most phones would have hardware AES
encryption.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to be that bad, but otherwise it wouldn't be taking an hour to encrypt, the data partition.
Well, that is because it has to read the data then write the data again.
And then the flash devices are typically actually slower, especially the ones used on these devices. They're not the same as a solid state disk. Those are much faster, but by design they're faster. Yep. So anyway, so there's that part, and here's the app. Okay, so the app is okay. Let me go to the beginning of this first screen first. So this is the first screen, and we'll look at the designer here, and I'll just kind of zoom in here. This is one thing that you can also consider, when you write your app, is you need to give users a warning if anything that can potentially be sensitive is going to be stored on the device or be uploaded, transmitted to another website. Okay, you always want to make sure that people understand there's always a risk involved when they use your app.
And data
Okay.
usage.
Sorry?
And data usage warnings.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Data usage, meaning it's going to use up bandwidth
Yeah.
if you require it to hook up to a remote source. Yep. So this is really just the first screen. It's a splash screen. It doesn't really do much. If people click the I understand button, it brings you to the actual screen. I just want to show you the code for this particular block. Most of you probably still remember this. The block to start another screen is just like that. Okay, open another screen with start value. Is the name of the block. You have to specify the actual name in text of the screen that you're starting. And also, in this case, I used the one with a start value, so I can potentially, send anything over, like a pin code. Okay, if I want the first screen to also include a pin code, I can specify the pin code in my list. Are there any questions at this point about this rather, simple block of code? Okay, if there are no questions, we'll move on to the main one. Okay, so here's the main screen, and let's go take a look at the designer screen first. So the first block here, is really just for debugging purposes. In other words, later on, if I feel that this is no longer needed, I can just go ahead and hide it. Okay, instead of getting rid of it, I can just go ahead and hide it, so that if I need it back, it's easy to unhide it and say, okay, what's happening with my data. Okay. There's a button that is called Start from Scratch. It's really more or less for debugging purposes. But I think if someone is part way into entering the log entry, if they want to start from scratch, having a button to do that is probably one of the easiest solution. I'm not interpreting the back button in this particular app. Okay, so now I have a whole bunch of list pickers. And everything here is arranged in a vertical screen arrangement container. Okay, so within here we have just a typical label. It's called quick entry, and this part here is a text label. It gets updated as people progress in picking choices. So that's basically what that is about. And then we have a starting point here. It's basically let people select which one of the three categories they can select. And then here we have one is for how people are feeling. It's for logging emotions. One is for logging urges, and one is for logging the use of a skill. For every single thing that they log, there's a little slider. Okay, so people can record. Okay, am I feeling minimum 0, or am I feeling the maximum, which is a 10? But in this case, I don't even let people pick a number. It's just a slider. Is it all the way maxed out, or is it all the way minimized? Okay. And then plus there's a comment area. It's just a really big text box here for people to put in additional comments. Okay, so if they want to identify what made me feel a certain way, okay, they can record the trigger. They can also record the thoughts in their mind, as they, experience that particular emotion or urge, to do certain things, okay? Or if they're applying a certain skill, they can also say, okay, how did they, apply the skill and how it's helping out and so on and so forth. After everything is entered, there's this little button here that says, okay, I want to, put this entry into the quote-unquote database. There's really no database, but I'll show you guys how, a database is kind of emulated. Okay, and then after the first screen, there's a second screen just for review purposes. The review screen or the review container looks just like this. Okay, it's really simple. It's a vertical arrangement thing that contains 3 items. The reason why I use vertical arrangement and all kinds of other arrangement stuff is because with an arrangement, you can turn the entire arrangement invisible, and then the whole block of screen just disappears. Okay, and it's very convenient, when you just have to turn off one thing, and then the entire block just collapses. Okay, so that's why I use these things for arrangement purposes. It has 2 buttons, okay, and a date. The date is initialized to the date of today, and then the earlier is 1 day before, later is 1 day after. So this way people can kind of go through their log entries in a very crude way. Okay, I only got time to work up to this point, but it is functional. I'll show you guys how it works. The review part here is the part. Right now it just do a data dump of what I store in TinyDB. So it's not really legible to a person unless you understand the data structure of the whole thing. It's for debugging purposes at this point, but it's not going to be a whole lot of work for me to format what I see here into something that people can actually read. Okay, so I'll show you guys everything today. When I run the app, and then I'll show you guys how it's done. Okay, are there any questions before we move on? No questions. So once again, the emphasis is how do we make use of lists in an app here, and how do we store data into TinyDB almost as if it is a database. Okay, it's not a true database, but it is close in this case. I can use it for a lot of purposes that are normally I would need a database for. Okay. All right. So without any questions, what I'll do is I'm going to run the app in the emulator. I have already installed the app remotely onto the emulator. so now we can get to the app. It's called DBT Diary Card. All right, so let me see if I can magnify this a little bit. I think there are ways to make it bigger. Just need to find out how to do it. Doesn't show the function keys here. It's ADB, Android emulator. This one. There's a function key, I think, to do it. I cannot remember which one. But that's okay. I think, for the most part, we can still read it like this.
Alt enter.
Alt enter. Okay. There we go. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So now we're running this app here. The debugging part is still here because when I changed the visibility, I did not, recreate the APK file and reinstall it. Okay. So that's why, using App Inventor 2 is a little bit more cumbersome because it doesn't update the emulator automatically. But right now, we have the usual stuff here. So people would start with I, okay, because when you click I, it gives you the options, okay, what was that you want to log, okay. So in this case, for DBT, they focus on these 3 particular categories. So every time you log something, you have to say I felt something, which is an emotion. I had an urge to do something. Basically the emotion urges people to to respond to it in a certain way. And the third one is I used a particular skill, a DBT skill, to handle a situation or handle a person or something like that. Okay. So in this case, let's say that whoever is using this app felt a particular feeling. So click felt, and you can see that I changed the list picker from I ... to felt ... Okay, and this is really done by hiding and showing different list pickers. So basically just hit the previous one and then make the next one visible depending on what was picked. Okay, so when felt is clicked, it has another list. Okay, so it has the different emotions that can be logged. So in this case, I felt miserable. Okay, so you can see the label is now updated. Today I felt miserable at a level of. Okay, so that's really just a label. It's basically keeping track of what are we logging? Are we logging feelings or urges or the use of skills? And if it is for emotion, what are we exactly feeling? So I'm updating that as we type this up. Okay, so this bar can be drag left or right to handle the intensity, and then here we can write down certain things. We can say I missed my bus and felt really bad because I'll be late for school. Okay. All right. So let's say that's my log entry here. Then we can enter the log. So the enter log will basically give the user one last chance to say, are you sure this is what you want to enter into the log? Okay, so they can click yes, and then the whole thing starts from scratch again. Now it's supposed to pick up the log right now. Okay, so I think I have to change the logic so it can pick up the log. But basically that's what the data is stored internally. Okay, this is actually picked up from TinyDB. So inside TinyDB, each day has its own entry in TinyDB. And each day is a list of pairs. And the list of pair, it has a key of the time, and then the body or the value is basically what it is logging. So right now we can see 4:26:28 p.m., which is GMT, I think. Yeah, that looks about right. That's GMT time. And then we have a list that is storing what is the log entry for that particular time. So I can go through this a few times so you can see multiple log entries. So I will pick up something else. So I would say I use a skill, And then inside skill, there are 4 basic skills in DBT. So I can say, well, I felt really bad because I was late, so I'm gonna apply, say, emotion regulation here, okay? So I apply emotion regulation, and I applied it really well, okay? Now this is the part that I forgot to change here, is I really should empty out the text box because it's keeping the previous text box's content. So I really should be emptying out after the add button is clicked. So I can enter here and say, I breathe deeply and focus on 5 senses. And that's one of the techniques that they use, for emotion regulation. So then we can say enter log again. Are you ready to enter this log? Let's click yes. And it's not updated automatically, but now we have 2 entries. Can everybody see that there are now 2 entries in the log? Now this is all permanently stored in TinyDB. Okay. In other words, if someone is to turn off this machine and then turn it back on again, this will be picked up. I cannot really illustrate that using the emulator because the emulator mass store is not persistent. Okay, so that means if I disable the emulator and start it off again, it's not going to save the data. There is an option to make it persistent, but I haven't really used it yet. Any questions at this point? Can everybody see that once I can get to this data, it would not be too hard for me to format it into an actual text content because I have all the information here. I have, yep, go ahead.
So you save list or save text from list?
I save list.
Because I tried to save list.
Nope, you can save the entire list. It's really nice because if you save list instead of save text, you don't have to parse it back into the individual parts anymore. So that gives you more option of how you want to display it, later on. So right here, if you look at one entry, the first entry starts from here and it ends over here. The first part, which is the tag or the key, is basically the time of the day. The second part is a list of pairs itself, but in that particular list of pairs, we have, today I, which is a tag, and then the second one is felt. In this case, is a choice. Okay, what did I log in this case? And under felt, I have miserable, which means this is the emotion that I felt, or that in the log here. Under urge, there's no content because it's not a log entry for urge or skill or other urge and stuff like that. The slider is at a value of 8.2 at that point, and then the comment, which is just regular text, is I missed my bus and felt really bad because I'll be late for school, and that's the end of it. Okay. Now that we have these particular entries inside a list, it's not really hard for me to pick those out again and reformat it in any way I want and redisplay on the screen. Okay, so are there any questions about this little app here?
Question. Could you have done most of this with App Inventor 1.0?
It'll be harder because subroutines in App Inventor 1.0 does not have the concept of local variables. So I'll have to be a lot more careful when I write, the subroutines. There are some key concepts missing in App Inventor 1. So if you do it in App Inventor 1, you can probably still get it working, without a problem. But I think it's much better to do it in version 2. The trade-off is in App Inventor 1, it's more convenient. Because it updates the emulator directly. You don't have to go through the command lines to install the app and then run it and test it. But in App Inventor 2, they have more advanced programming concepts implemented, like local variables, returning values, a lot of the nice things they have put into version 2. Go ahead.
Can you show the code?
Yep.
When you save the list and when you read the list?
Sorry?
When you save the list and when you read.
Okay, I can definitely show you the code for that. Yep, go ahead.
Did you add the parentheses to make it more readable?
No, the parentheses are automatically added because it's a list. I just
Separate items.
exactly. I set the text property of a label to a variable or to a list value, and it automatically converts list into the parentheses to indicate the content in the list.
So if you actually added parentheses into the text again, then it's leave that character, or will it know it?
I'm kind of surprised they didn't add the quotes, because certain items here belong together, and a normal Lisp programming environment would insert the double quotes, just so that you can identify which part is which part. But in here, it doesn't really, put in all those extra items.
So if you put in parentheses inside of the text, still we get the.
It will still work correctly. It just doesn't get displayed correctly. When we use this particular way, it's just me being lazy. Because it was 1 a.m. I just wanted to see that it can store and retrieve the data. I ran out of time to actually do any type of formatting. So it's really just a quick and easy way for me to confirm that the app is working up to that point. Yep.
The list inside of a list.
Sorry?
Those are lists inside of a list.
Oh yeah. you can see the level of the parentheses, right? I mean, yep.
Good question.
Mm-hmm.
If it could take an hour to encrypt, it take another hour to decrypt?
No. The decryption is generally speaking a lot faster. But it will slow it down. It will slow down your device a little bit. Okay, so any other questions about the use of lists in this case? Okay. If there are no questions, I will show you guys the code. So let's see, do the same thing, toggle, we get back to here, and then I can show you the code. Okay, so let's start with some global variables. Okay, so the global variables are down here. Basically, I define some global variables as constants, basically. Okay, because there are certain text that has to be consistent between multiple parts of the program. It's better to define those things as global variables instead of using the text constant or literal text. Because if you have a typo, like one place you use an uppercase, the other place you use a lowercase, if they don't match, it's not going to work. Okay, that applies to screen names. That applies to the tag or the key of a pair. It applies to many other items. So whenever you have some kind of text that has to be shared between multiple parts of a program, it really is helpful to turn them into constants first, and then just use the constant, which are basically global variables, throughout your program. Are there any questions about the rationale behind defining these, rather simple, global variables, but they actually serve an important role when you're writing larger programs? Okay, no questions? Okay. And if there are no questions, I will start with, let's see here, we'll start with this initialized subroutine here. Okay, so we can see, I call the button debug, but it actually should be called initialize. It's a subroutine, and the concept of a subroutine is like this. Okay, this is the definition of a subroutine. Yep.
What kind of warnings does it show? Because you have a...
Oh, the 3 warnings?
Yeah.
I guess when we go through the code, we'll...
I think you can click on it. Oh, okay. Never mind.
I know version 1 does that. It shows, pops up all the items. Here, it just shows the triangle on the block that has a problem. I guess when we go through the code, we'll find all those items. Okay, a subroutine is just like this. You define a subroutine using a subroutine definition block. In this case, I use the first one because it has no return value. But other times you might have return values, which means once the subroutine is done, it will give you a value, and you can basically plug in the invocation of the subroutine to any place that expects a value. Okay, so that can come in handy. I have another subroutine of that nature, but this one is not. Okay, this one is just initializing the whole thing. And this will be a good time to initialize the text box too, to basically empty it out. But I'll just go through the code here, just so that we can see what initialize does. Okay, and let's just focus on initialize at this point. Initialize does not take any parameters, okay, but you can have parameters if you want to. If you want to add parameters, you have to click the add button here, and then it gives you a little box here, and you can add additional parts to your subroutine, and you can have parameters. Now these parameters, for those of you who have taken cisp300 and also 360 particularly, anyone who has taken C++ or Java or Visual Basic should understand these concepts. With parameters, there are mainly two types. Okay, you can pass by value, which means the parameter itself can get changed, but it doesn't happen to whatever specifies the parameter. There's also passed by reference. Okay, if a parameter is passed by reference, it means if you make changes to the parameter, it makes changes to the original item. Okay, now this is where lists get interesting, because if you pass a number by value, and you change the parameter inside the subroutine, the original variable that you used to specify the parameter doesn't get changed. Okay, it's just a copy. When you use lists, even when you pass by value, because that's the only way to pass things around in App Inventor, it's actually passed by reference. So if you pass a list into a subroutine and you make changes to that list, the original list is changed, which is actually a good thing. Because if you don't want that to happen, you can always make a duplicate once you're inside the subroutine itself. Being able to change the original item turns out to be a really useful feature in this case. Okay, but in this case, in initialize, I don't have a need for parameters or arguments, so I'm not going to use any like that. This is just the name of the subroutine. I just called it initialize because that's what it does. It initializes this particular screen. The first thing it does is to get a global variable. Now, global data is not just global data. It's actually a global variable called data. Okay, it's getting that from TinyDB, and I'll show you what the content it contains. The second thing it will do is to set the review date, which is in the review portion, to the current time that I get from the clock. This part here, call clock.now, is going to get you a time. But that time is not what we understand as time. It's not time as in, oh, it's the 14th of October, 9:40:04 seconds. Okay, it's in milliseconds since a certain time. So it's a huge integer number that makes very little sense to us when we just look at the number. Okay, but it's really useful because you can add, subtract, and stuff like that with that particular timestamp a whole lot easier than we are dealing with a normal date that is human friendly. So I'll show you, how to use a particular timestamp like that later. It calls another subroutine here. The other subroutine is to review the review log based on the time, so that we can display, okay, these are the entries for today. Okay, and I can show you the other subroutine too. Okay, here we have a conditional statement block. It has only one thing to do when the condition is true, and it's basically saying if data is not a list, I will reset it so it becomes an empty list. This is for in case there's no data, or this is the first time I run the application, so TinyDB does not have an entry yet. So I'll go ahead and initialize the whole thing. Are we doing okay so far with this code? Okay, this is the really kind of the simpler part of the subroutine. The next one is actually a little bit harder. Okay, so I'll show you the code here. Okay, this block here, set LP today I dot elements 2. Okay, so this is a method that you use with a list picker. I use LP to abbreviate the list picker. This is a convention used by a lot of different programming languages. When you name a component, you basically use the component type as a prefix to the name. So in this case, because it's a list picker, I just use LP as the abbreviation of the component itself. So it's LP today I, and we are setting the elements. In other words, what choices do we have with this particular list picker? Well, this is a very good example of a subroutine that returns a value. A subroutine that does not return a value, like update review log, you can see the shape of this block is just a regular block. Okay, it has a little notch on the top, has a little tab at the bottom, so it can fit in, as one step of a larger block. The other one is shaped differently. So this one is shaped differently because it has a notch on a little tab on the left-hand side, basically saying that it returns a value, and that value can be used for other things. Okay, somebody else can take this value and do something with it. So in this case, the value that is returned by get or init value will be utilized by set lp today I dot elements to set the elements. Are we doing okay so far with the concept of a return value? Okay. And this subroutine is also a good example of illustrating how to use arguments, because it has 3 arguments. The first argument is pair list, which is a list of pairs. It keeps popping up the help here. The second one is called tag, which is basically the key, what am I trying to get or initialize, okay? Because if it's missing, I'm going to initialize it. If it is already there, I'll just return whatever I have. The third one is default value. Default value by itself is also a list, okay? It is an argument, but I'm passing a list as the argument. It is a list with only 3 items. The 3 items are basically the string or the constant of felt, the constant of had the urge to do something, which is the second global variable, and also the last one, the application of a skill. Okay. So are there any questions about the overall structure of this particular block here? After we look at this entire block, we'll go to get or init value so that we can take a closer look of what we can do with lists. Okay. The rest of this subroutine is really quite simple. It's really just turning on and off the visibility of the components. It's turning off everything except for today I blah blah blah. Okay, because that's the starting point. The way I designed this app is easy. There's only a few things that people can click that make sense. Okay, so they have to click this one, and then after it is used, then you can select more details, and then the first one just goes away. There's no way to go back. If you want to go back, you have to start all over again, pressing the start over again. But it has another subroutine here, at the bottom here, to update the review log based on today. And that's about it. I think I called this earlier already, didn't I? Yep. So that's duplicate, and I can just remove it here. So we can call. We can just press the delete key to remove it, and that's how we can get rid of it. Alright, so now we want to take a look at get or init value, which is a fairly complex subroutine by the standard of this class. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that one. And it's right here. Okay. The first thing we notice is it has 3 arguments, okay? When you click the plus button here, unfortunately my screen is really small. You can see that we have 3 inputs. Basically, one input is an argument. It has one argument called pair list, one called tag, and one called default value. If you want to have additional ones, you can actually drag it to here to add additional arguments. If you want to get rid of some arguments, you can also click it and press the delete key to get rid of some arguments. So you can always change the number of arguments when you define the subroutine. The other part that we notice is return, okay? Which means it has a value to return. And that's why in order to specify the rest of the body of this thing, it has to provide a value. And that's why we use this block here, initialize local v to something in return, which means we are defining a local variable called v in this case, and the block is going to return a value of some kind. Okay, and then we have the next level up, which is just a do block here, which allows you to specify some blocks to perform some operation. But at the very end, you will have to return a particular value. It has to specify a value. In this case, if we specify a value, that is really simple. It's just the value of our local variable v. But it doesn't have to be that simple. Okay, it can be an expression, can be another do block, return block itself, can be complicated all by itself. But in this case, all the complex logic is done by the do block, which is this part here. Okay. So the first thing I do is to set my local variable. So I look up the pair list here to look for a particular key, which is tag. If that is not found, return a simple string of false. That's basically what this block is saying. And this is an internal block. Okay, this block you can look it up in under lists, and it's at the bottom here. Okay, so it's a very quick way to locate the value, that is linked with a particular key in a list of pairs. Are we doing okay so far? Any questions? No questions? Okay. All right. So after I set my local variable v to the result of trying to look up something in the list, I have a conditional statement here, which it looks kind of funny because it has nothing to do when the condition is true, but it does have something to do when the condition is false. The reason why that is the case is the condition, which is this part here, is basically saying, am I getting a list back after I look up in the pair list? Well, I am expecting a list here. So if I am getting back a list, then I will say, hey, we are done. Okay, we got the right thing. Okay, it's a list. If we get something other than a list, then it is basically false, which basically says, there's no list item associated with this particular tag, so it's time to do the initialization. The first thing I do is I set my local variable to the default value, okay? Because I want to return that too as my result, okay? That's why I have to set it to the default value first. And then I just add the default value, make it associated with the tag that is an argument to this subroutine, and put that as the last item in pair list. Now this is the part that is kind of questionable, because if you look at the arguments, pair list is an input argument, okay, and that's the only type of argument that App Inventor lets us use, which means it is quote unquote passed by value. But yet, if I say add items to list, it actually changes the original list, and that's because lists are only passable by reference. Okay, the part of it that is passed by value is the handle that is passed by value. So you can have two handles or two references, but they're still pointing to the same list eventually. And that's why lists are natively passed by reference and not passed by value. Are we doing okay so far with that? So by doing this, I am actually changing the original list so that if it doesn't have the key, that the value doesn't have a value associated with the tag that I specify, it will initialize it so that it will have that default value. But at the same time, it returns the value that I wanted to return, which is down here. Are there any questions? No questions? Looks like you have some questions here. Yeah.
No, I just felt like laughing.
Sorry?
I just felt like laughing.
Oh, okay. That's fine. Any other questions?
Question: when would the default GNT was 0?
0?
Yeah, or no?
Well, you have to find something that cannot really be a part of the content to identify, oh, I didn't find it. Okay? So one way to make that happen is not even to see whether it's a, well, yeah, one way to make that happen is, this is actually not the best way to do it because I'm looking specifically for a list. So what I really should have done is this. Okay, so let's see, we get rid of this, separate this part from here. The best way to do it is to basically say, did I get this back? Okay, that would be the best way to check for it. So I would say if not text equal to false. Okay, so if it is not the case that I'm getting false back, that means I found the item and there's nothing else to do. So that's why the do part is empty. If I do get false back here, then I have to do this part here because I did not find the item that I'm looking for. So the next question is, what if false is the value associated with this tag? Then it cannot tell the difference. Now, obviously, in that case, you would just be adding another item, but we still don't want to do that. If you want to avoid any chances of misidentifying that, you basically can just make this something that you will not contain in a list. You just have to make sure that they are exactly the same. Or better yet, define a global variable for an invalid value. So everybody's still following me, kind of understanding the logic here? Okay. All right. So once we are done with this one, we can work with the other blocks. The other blocks are quite a bit easier, okay? But there was a request earlier to basically say how do we store the list and how do we retrieve it. So let's look at the part that stores, okay? So this is the part that runs after I click yes in the dialog box to say I want to save this particular log entry, okay? So let's see what happens here. Okay, so let's look at the outermost block here. This is an event handler. When you click a particular button in a dialog box, this basically will get triggered. So this gets triggered, when a notifier dialog box, has interaction, has a confirmation in this case. So you can now compare choice, which is an argument to this block here, to one of the words that I specify in that thing. This is another place that I can use an improvement because I spelled out yes here, and I also spelled out yes when I created the dialog box. If I do not match the cases, like in one case I use lowercase yes, and in the other case I use uppercase yes, they won't match up, okay, and the code won't work. So this is one place where I can make a very slight but important improvement, which basically says, over here, let me see if this works. Initialize global. Oh, that works. So I just started typing in the area, and then it shows me, all the options that has the word initialize in it. So I can just go ahead and start a new name, str yes. Basically it's just a string with the content of yes, okay? So we'll just go ahead and say it is just uppercase yes here. After that, I have no use of this yes here anymore. Instead, I will refer to the global variable. Okay, so I can say get str yes. Oh, okay, I can type the whole thing and just click it and then stash it over here. And now it's just using the global variable. Now, this by itself doesn't help a single bit unless I change the other side as well. So now I have to go look for the other side, which is over here. So this yes also has to be changed. Okay, so toss this one into the trash can, toss this one into the trash can, and refer to this one as get global string yes. Put it here. So now they have to be the same. Okay. In other words, this is also going to help if I want to translate this app to another language. Okay, so if I want to translate into, I know just a little bit of Spanish. Okay, if I want to translate into Spanish, I only have to change the definition of str yes to C, and now it's consistent. Okay, so this is why we want to use string constants as much as we can. So obviously I can do the same thing with no. I'm not going to do it now because there are many other places where I can make changes like that. But this is an example of how you can make your app more robust. Okay, it's the use of global variables. Most people think, well, why do I want to waste the time to define a global variable that is just a regular text string and then refer to the global variable instead of typing the text everywhere? This is why. Okay, because it really helps. Sometimes I felt the same way. I want to shortcut things a little bit, and then later on pay the price because I have a case mismatch. Okay, and then I was figuring out, why is my app not working? Well, because the cases are not matching. All right. So, are there any questions about the app at this point? Yep.
Does it use memory differently and use constants?
It probably has a very slight overhead, or maybe it actually saves memory, because instead of having YES defined twice as literal text, you just have it defined once as a global variable, and then in both places where you refer to the global variable, it's really quote unquote a pointer, right? It's just a reference to the single thing. So if you have a string that is really long, you are saving memory instead of wasting memory. But for something that's short like YES, it's probably not too much of a saving in terms of space used by your app, but in terms of potential problems, you're saving yourself a lot of trouble, potential trouble. Yep.
So when you started typing there and it just popped up automatically, did you have to click there, or did you just put the mouse in the integrator?
I just pressed the enter key.
It doesn't matter where the mouse is at?
Doesn't seem to matter. That's a good question. Let's try this. Okay. So I toss this one out, and I type here, not defined, it's called initialize. So initialize global, and let's call this str no. And I just press the enter key. Nothing happens because it doesn't turn gray. It doesn't match anything it can recognize. So I say initialize global. I think this is as far as I can go, because if I type anything more than that, the gray goes away. If I press the enter key right now, it puts it where it is convenient. It doesn't overlap something else. It doesn't plug into something else either in this case. So it's str no, and then I can type text no. Okay, that doesn't work. Nope, that doesn't work. So text is by itself, because it's also kind of gray. So this would be a good place to see if it can
Probably text
automatically insert it into that socket, right? So it's type text,
equals.
and then equals? No. Oh, okay. Nope. Nope. This is as far as I can go. If I type any further, it goes away. It doesn't know what block to correspond to. So if I press the enter key, it does insert into that socket. So it does depend on where your mouse pointer is at when you type.
It depends on what's selected. When you have the
So when this is
yellow
selected,
highlighting around it, it'll go
Uh-huh.
to the first block, first empty socket,
okay.
or a compatible socket.
Interesting. Okay, so now that I have this selected here, let's see. So we'll say get global str no, and see whether it knows where to put it. It knows where to put it.
That's awesome.
Yep. Saves a lot of typing.
Yeah.
Well, it saves a lot of time going here and then drag and drop a lot,
Navigating around,
Yep.
What if
dragging.
both those button texts were missing
Sorry?
what if both the button 1 text and 2 were missing, then where would it put it?
It'll go to the first one.
First available.
Yep.
The first open socket.
First available compatible.
So it's actually pretty smart. Yep. All right. Excellent. So are there any questions? Well, this is actually not even the core part of the app or the subroutine that I was showing you guys. The core part of that is how do we save all that data, okay? So now we have the other part of this. Okay, so let's go to this part here first. Okay, this part, I think I just explained it. It's just confirming that we selected yes when it was asking us, do you want to save the log entry? If you click no, it doesn't do a single thing, okay? It basically says, okay, you might want to type some more in the comments area. If you click yes, this block of code gets triggered. And the first part it does is to define a global variable that I call timestamp, okay? And timestamp doesn't really do a whole lot. It just gets the current time, which is now, and convert it, store that as local variable timestamp, okay? So I take a snapshot, at the clock and say, okay, this is the time that I'm freezing, because I need to get both the date and the time from the same timestamp at the same time. The next thing it does is another block to create another variable. In this case, I call this variable date log, which is initialized to a value that I try to get from TinyDB based on. Okay, there's a little bit more to this code here. Based on the converted date from the timestamp. Okay, in other words, this part here, get timestamp, gives me probably the number of milliseconds since a particular time, which is a huge integer. And the first thing it does, which is this block here, is to convert that into a date format that we understand. Okay, and that probably depends on how your Android system is set up. Because in Europe, they have a different way of writing out the date, so it all depends on how you do your configuration. I probably should make this app less sensitive to that, because if you change the configuration, then it won't be able to retrieve what has been saved already. But once again, I threw it together in one night, and it was late, so I didn't really think much about it. And that serves as the tag. Okay, so the date serves as the tag to query the TinyDB. Okay, and I'm expecting to get a list back, and that list, if it is available, will be stored in date log. Now, it doesn't seem like I really need two blocks here, because why can't I use one single block to initialize and create both local variables? That would be a valid question. It's not that hard. I mean, I can just click the plus sign here and say, instead of having one single variable, I can drag another one here, so I have two variables. The problem with this approach is I would not know which variable is initialized first, because I need timestamp as a variable to be defined first, and then I can define date log. If I have a block inside a block that makes sure that timestamp is initialized first, and then date log is initialized second. If I have both in the same block, there's no guarantee that App Inventor will go in the same order as they are defined.
You can use set.
You
can use set.
Set? Yep, I can use set inside the block as well. Alright, so now that we have tried to retrieve something from TinyDB, the first thing I do is this conditional statement. It's basically asking what I retrieved from TinyDB based on today's date. Is that a list? Because if I did not retrieve a list, then it's not something that I'm expecting. Okay, I want to retrieve a list of pairs. Or if it is empty, it is also not a list. In both cases, it would use a set statement here to basically say, if I get anything other than a pair of lists or even just an empty list, I would initialize that to an empty list. Because otherwise I would not be able to go through the next block of code. Are we still doing okay so far? So I'm doing some error checking here. If I do not do the error checking, it can have problems. So the next block is really huge, but it's really kind of tedious. It's just really tedious code here. I'm just going to add to the list, which is date log here, another list here. Okay, the other pair is basically the first part of the pair is the tag, and that tag is the time of right now. Okay, so I'm using the same local variable timestamp, which is once again the milliseconds since a certain time up to now, but this time I'm converting into a time that we can read. So it would be like 10:06, and then the second or something like that. Okay, so something that we can actually read easily. That will serve as the tag of this particular pair list. The body or the value of this pair list is a list itself, because there are multiple items that I want to store here. When you look at that particular list, it is a list of pairs again, but it is based on today I, and then the selection of the today I list picker based on felt, and then the selection of that block, urge, and then the selection of that block, and so on. So even though I'm not logging, I can only log one of the three. Okay, I can only log felt, urge, or skill. But since I was lazy, I just throw everything in here. Okay, because I can always do the post processing a little bit later. Okay, I can look at the today I field and then decide what to do with the rest of the values. So I'm just logging everything, everything from the logger, the slider, the comment, text box, and so on. I just log everything on the screen, okay, into this a list of pairs. After this list of pair is constructed, the next operation is to store the list, store the entire thing based on today's timestamp back into the database, back to a TinyDB. So effectively what I'm doing is I retrieve the entry from TinyDB, add one entry to it, and then store it back to TinyDB. So this way I'm making that particular entry longer and longer and longer as I add additional logs to that day. Are we doing okay so far? All right. The rest of this block here is kind of simple. It's really just changing the visibility of everything. It's just changing the visibility of the slider back to false. I'm hiding everything except for today I, and I'm also resetting the log entry text, to just log entry here, and I really should be adding one more thing here because I should be resetting the text in comments. So we can look for comments, this guy here, and then we'll go ahead and change this text back to nothing. Okay, so let's go ahead and change the text to, let's see, forgot to do this. Change the text back to nothing. That's what I missed last time. So that's why the comments field still had the text from last time. The slider probably should be reset back to 0, halfway and stuff like that. So there were additional things that I have to do to kind of reset everything back to the original state. So are there any questions? This is the part that stores the value. Okay. What about the part that picks up the value?
Same way.
Pretty much the same way. Okay. So I'll go ahead and show you guys how I did that. Okay. So where is that? Update review log is right here. Okay, so this is assuming that we already have a review date set up already, like this one here. This global variable, once again, is a timestamp based on the milliseconds since blah, 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 okay? The first thing I do with it is, instead of looking at it as a huge integer number, this time I'm only interested in the date part. I'm not interested in the time of day, I'm only interested in the date. So I'm converting it back to the date format first. And then what I do next is I set the label to that particular date. So I can see, okay, we are reviewing log entries of this particular day. The next item will set the actual log part, which is a much larger text here, to the value that I'm retrieving from the TinyDB based on the date itself. That's all. Okay, it just tries to retrieve something from TinyDB and stash it into the text box. This is also where I can do a lot of formatting. Based on what I'm retrieving, I can do a lot of formatting, so the output is a lot more user friendly. But I ran out of time last night. I only got it up to this point. I was able to retrieve it, and I go, okay, I'll continue the rest a little bit later. But this is an example of how you can use a list, the concept of list of pairs, to store fairly complex data structure using TinyDB. Now the nice thing about using date itself as a key to TinyDB is I can scan. Because what I can do is I can start with a certain date, and then I can just add one, subtract one day, go to the previous one, see if I can retrieve something. So I can scan through TinyDB for this particular app and see which days have actual entries in it. Let me show you the other code that has to do with, that will call this code here, okay, which is the next and the previous button. Let me show you the next and previous button in the app first. Earlier and later. Okay, so how is that done? Now when I press earlier, you can see the date is changing. This is basically the date reflecting the date of the review that I'm trying to retrieve, and those are the days where I do not have any items yet. And the later part would correspond to this is today, so I just put in 2 entries today, and that's why it retrieved these 2 entries. So the next question is, how do I implement earlier and later in the app? The earlier and later in the app, they're actually very simple.
You get the day.
This is it. This is for the next day. Okay, so what it does is it's getting the current review date, which is the date that is the date in milliseconds since 1970 of the current review date, and it's just adding using the add days call to add 1 day to it, and then the result is stored back into review date. Effectively, what it's doing is just incrementing it by the number of milliseconds in a day. But I'm not doing it by hand because I don't want to have to depend on the actual storage or how the actual format of how a date is stored. And then once I update review date, I just call update review log again, so that it would update the labels correctly. That's it. That's how I scan from one day to the next. There are no other ways that I know of that can scan through your TinyDB to see what is in your TinyDB. Okay, so if someone can figure out how to scan through TinyDB and say, give me everything in TinyDB, let me know, because I do not know of a way to do that just yet. Yep.
Yeah, I did. Well, if you get multiple entries in a day, would that skip over like the ones in the same day?
Say again.
Since you're incrementing it by a day,
Yeah.
like once you get multiple entries and multiple logs.
It will list all the entries on that day.
Okay.
So once you get to a day, it will show all the entries, all the log entries of that particular day. I suppose we can get another screen to go through each item, in detail. But once again, I ran out of time last night, so I couldn't get to that point. But just being able to get to a certain day and retrieve all the log entries of that day is already helpful, because now I have a list of all the entries of the day, I can process it, using another screen, or I can use the same screen to display the content differently. I can use a list picker, and basically say, okay, at this time we have an entry related to feeling, at this time we have an entry related to urge. Which one do you want to display? They click the entry, and then the detail displays in the label.
How about
So
if
there
you create like a list of days? Save that list.
You can scan through it. You can basically.
Yeah, list of days.
Yep. You can even emulate the effect of a calendar using a canvas. Now that is a lot of work, so I don't really want to do it. Do you guys see what I'm saying? So you can basically have a little calendar thing, because we can emulate a calendar by using a canvas. There are 7 days in a week, so you can basically we have Sunday and then Saturday on the other side. So you can basically just kind of list the days, just like with a calendar. When someone clicks on that screen, you know where on the canvas they have just clicked. So if you know how you printed the dates on the calendar, you can back calculate which day they have clicked on, and then you can retrieve the log entries of that particular date.
I meant something else. For example, all the days you put in a list and save that list. And you can get all days together.
You can get all days together. Yep. Typically, for DBT, they want weekly logs. So what you can do, is to just keep it for a week, and you have a way to review for this particular week. But you can probably want to supply an option of starting on Monday and ending on Sunday, or starting on Sunday and then ending on Saturday, because it depends. Are there any questions about this particular app? I can put it onto the gallery, so that way you guys can download it, play with it, just go through, stare at it. I think it might be helpful. I mean, if you guys can say, but Tech, I found a much better way to do this, then go ahead and change it, put it back on the gallery so I can take a look at it too. Okay, so that's exactly what I'll do next. Is to go back to the designer and go back to my projects. Go to gallery and just sign in again. So once again, this is good confirmation that your apps are not automatically uploaded to the gallery, so people cannot really see your project unless you upload it. So I'm gonna add this one. Oh, I forgot to take a screenshot. Screenshot. Okay, select region. Okay, save to call this DBT diary. That's the app part, I think. It's the image part. Okay, how should we classify this? I'll just call it education. And you guys should be able to see it now. Alright. Any other questions? Other questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
So now you have this diary. Show it to a doctor to get the therapy.
Well, usually it's a tool, so someone would be, going to a class that teaches, DBT first, and this is a tool so that people can log the entries, and they can talk about it, in the class setting. Typically, DBT is done in a group setting, so basically the next time you go to the group, get together, a therapist or counselor, will help people go through the list and go, okay, basically give people guidance of what to do next. Okay. Any other questions? I think I'm gonna sell this app to Kaiser for money.